August the 9th, 2023. Evening, Sheffield. The summer air was heavy, but inside a quiet block on Fraser Drive, a nightmare was beginning. Two women knocked on their neighbor's door, not with friendship, but with intent. Zoe Ryder, once seen as a caring neighbor, and Nicola Lethbridge, once trusted by those around her, now stood as predators in disguise. How could two familiar faces turn an act of kindness into a scene of cruelty? This was not robbery born of desperation, but violence fueled by power, a deliberate choice to humiliate and destroy. They filmed their assault on a mobile phone, laughing as their victim begged for mercy, capturing their own descent into savagery. Inside, South Yorkshire's most notorious women, our full list of female criminals and life sentences. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where Sheffield's streets whisper secrets and the most dangerous women of South Yorkshire are finally unmasked. Today, we expose the chilling true stories of women whose rage, greed, and jealousy turned ordinary homes into crime scenes, and whose sentences echo across the nation. What you're about to hear may haunt you long after the screen fades to black. First offender, Zoe Ryder, 45 years old, and Nicola Lethbridge, 47 years old. In the summer heat of August the 9th, 2023, the quiet suburb of Woodseats in Sheffield became the scene of something almost unspeakable. Inside a modest flat on Fraser Drive, a vulnerable man opened his door to his neighbors, unaware that the next few hours would turn into a nightmare no one could have imagined. Stephen Kosicharski was 60 years old, kind-hearted but frail, living with a mild learning disability. To those around him, he was gentle, polite, always ready to lend a hand. But to Zoe Ryder, aged 36, and Nicola Lethbridge, aged 45, he was something else entirely a target. They lived on the same street and had befriended him weeks earlier, pretending to care while quietly exploiting him for money and trust. That night, they decided to finish what they had started. At around 8 in the evening, the two women entered his flat together. What followed was an assault that prosecutors later called sadistic. They beat Stephen repeatedly, taunted him, and filmed parts of the attack on a mobile phone. They forced him to expose himself, threatened to mutilate him with scissors, and laughed as they stole jewelry and other belongings. When the violence finally stopped, they left him bleeding and alone on the floor. Stephen managed to call for help using his emergency line, whispering for an ambulance before collapsing. He was rushed to hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. 22 separate injuries to his head and body, a brain bleed from repeated blows. He died 2 days later. Police combed through CCTV, phone records, and witness accounts. During door-to-door inquiries, an officer found the women's mobile phone inside it, video clips of the assault. When confronted, both denied murder, claiming they were too intoxicated to remember. The evidence told another story. Detectives said the footage showed cruelty in its purest form. At Sheffield Crown Court, a jury found them guilty of both murder and robbery after a 3-week trial. The judge called the crime brutal, heartless, and despicable, adding that they had deliberately targeted a man who could not defend himself. On the 5th of June 2024, they were each sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 26 years. Outside court, Stephen's friend Mary Jones said, "He had a heart of gold. I cry most days and most nights. They killed him for nothing." The story reverberated across Britain, not because of who the killers were, but because of who they chose to destroy. This case stands as a warning written in pain. Kindness can make a person vulnerable. Neighbors are not always friends. And recording cruelty does not make it less real, only more damning. Even in the safety of one's own home, trust remains the most dangerous gift to give. After Zoe Ryder and Nicola Lethbridge brought cruelty into a neighbor's home, you might think the depths of violence couldn't sink any lower. But just months earlier in Doncaster, another woman had already crossed that same line, this time within her own family. Second offender, Lindsey Fletcher, 29 years old. On Christmas Day, 2017, in the quiet town of Doncaster, what should have been a day of peace and family reunion turned into one of the most gruesome murders in South Yorkshire's history. Behind the closed door of a small flat, a long simmering hatred exploded into unimaginable violence. Lindsey Fletcher, 39 years old, was a mother battling addiction to crack cocaine and heroin. She lived on St. James Street, moving between friends' homes and drug dens, her life consumed by chaos. That winter, she had gone to live with her 72-year-old step-grandfather, Michael Eaton, a retired delivery driver who had taken her in out of pity. But behind her apparent dependence lay resentment and greed. Prosecutors would later say Fletcher loathed Eaton and viewed him as a source of easy money. On Christmas Day, at some point during the evening, Fletcher launched a savage attack on the elderly man in his own home. Armed with a steak knife, she stabbed him more than 120 times, 30 times to the back of his head, 90 more to his body and neck. When the knife was blunted, she beat him with his own walking stick. The flat became a scene of horror. She then stripped the body, poured bleach over it to destroy evidence, and left the man who had once cared for her lying lifeless on the floor. The next day, as families across Britain opened their gifts, police were called to Mr. Eaton's home in Borowy. His body was found surrounded by blood and the smell of chemicals. Detectives soon uncovered the full scale of the crime. Fletcher had not only committed murder, she had forced her 12-year-old daughter to help dispose of the evidence. Together, they carried his bloodied clothes to a patch of waste ground and the River Don. Divers later recovered the jumper, but the murder weapon was never found. During her trial at Sheffield Crown Court, Fletcher claimed she killed her step-grandfather in self-defense after he tried to assault her, reviving alleged abuse from childhood. But prosecutors dismantled that claim, pointing to her online searches for poisoning and to witnesses who said she had spoken of wanting him dead. The jury took only 4 days to find her guilty of murder. The judge called it a cold-blooded, ferocious killing and sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 13 years. The case shocked the country. Reporters described it as a tragedy without logic, born of hatred and addiction. It reignited debate about the impact of drugs on violent crime and the silent trauma passed through generations. From such horror emerged bitter lessons. Addiction feeds destruction faster than forgiveness can heal. Silence about abuse festers into rage, and involving a child in crime destroys 2 lives, not 1. Violence does not begin with a weapon, it begins where empathy ends. Lindsey Fletcher's story proved that blood ties don't always mean loyalty, and that hatred can simmer quietly for years before exploding. But even that Christmas killing wasn't the last time love turned lethal in South Yorkshire. Third offender, Pauline Caster, 43 years old. On the night of Tuesday, the 19th of October 2021, in the quiet South Yorkshire village of Catcliffe, the sound of shouting shattered the calm. Behind the door of a modest home on High Hazel Crescent, a marriage that had endured 22 years of chaos, drugs, and violence finally imploded, leaving one partner dead and the other in prison for life. Pauline Caster was 43 years old that autumn night. Her husband, Kevin, also 43, was a former serviceman haunted by post-traumatic stress and addiction. Their relationship had long been described by police and family as toxic and inevitable in its tragedy. Neighbors had grown used to the shouting, the slammed doors, the eruptions of anger that never seemed to end. But that night was different. The argument began, prosecutors later said, over jealousy. Caster accused her husband of sleeping with another woman. Fueled by rage, prescription drugs, and years of resentment, the row escalated violently. CCTV cameras outside the house recorded the entire scene. Pauline raining punches on Kevin, stamping on him as he lay helpless on the floor. For 20 relentless minutes, she attacked him. Witnesses heard her screaming, "Are you hurting you, B?" Before the house fell silent. Inside, Kevin had already consumed a lethal cocktail, high doses of an epilepsy drug, lamotrigine, combined with cocaine and other substances. Forensic experts later confirmed he would have died within minutes from the overdose alone. But Pauline's assault accelerated that death, leaving him bloodied and motionless on the floor. For more than an hour and a half, she did nothing. Only at 9:30 did she run into the street calling for help, claiming he had been in a pub fight. Paramedics found Kevin beyond saving. The autopsy revealed a combination of toxic drugs and multiple blunt force injuries. Pauline was arrested on suspicion of murder. During questioning, she broke down, admitting she had lost control, but investigators saw the footage a sustained, deliberate beating. The prosecution called it a determined and sustained attack. In April 2023, at Sheffield Crown Court, Pauline changed her plea to guilty on the 3rd day of trial. The judge described her life as violent and baleful, but noted the extraordinary circumstance Kevin's overdose meant he would have died regardless. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 7 years and 3 months. Their son Lewis described the relationship as toxic, saying, "They loved each other too much, it was inevitable one would die." The case left South Yorkshire in shock, not only for its violence but for its bleak intimacy, two lives intertwined by love, drugs, and destruction. From the wreckage came hard lessons: jealousy poisons faster than forgiveness, silence inside violent homes kills slowly, and addiction corrodes every boundary of reason. Love without control can be the most dangerous weapon of all. Yet domestic fury wasn't confined to marriage. In Sheffield, jealousy and addiction collided behind the thin walls of a housing block where Kerry Taylor's rage transformed a neighborly argument into a murder that stunned the city. Fourth offender, Kerry Taylor, 41 years old. On a warm Saturday evening, the 4th of July 2020, in Sheffield's Ravenscroft Place, a sudden burst of violence ended a fragile friendship and shocked an entire community. What began as an argument over drugs inside a small flat spiraled into one of the most brutal neighbor-on-neighbor killings the city had seen in years. Kerry Taylor was 41 years old, living a chaotic life of addiction and crime. Her record stretched back nearly 2 decades: assault, kidnap, robbery, and carrying weapons. She was volatile, unpredictable, and well known to police. Her neighbor, 55-year-old Pearl Simone Hancock, was a mother and grandmother trying to rebuild her life after personal struggles. The two women had once shared drugs and conversation, but their relationship had soured. On that July evening, it erupted. Witnesses later recalled hearing shouting, the kind that made walls tremble. Inside the flat, Taylor accused Miss Hancock of taking her drugs. In a frenzy, she grabbed a large kitchen knife and launched a ferocious assault. Miss Hancock suffered more than 10 stab wounds to her back, shoulders, and head. The force was so brutal that a bone in her arm was detached. She bled heavily in the communal hallway, gasping for breath, managing only to whisper to a neighbor, "Kerry, Kerry did this." Taylor fled the scene, her hands slick with blood. Half an hour later, she was spotted walking topless along Sheffield Parkway, screaming incoherently and claiming she had been raped, a false story she would later admit she invented while intoxicated. When police arrested her, she made racist remarks about her victim and expressed no remorse. Forensic officers found the knife and trail of blood leading back to her flat, confirming what Miss Hancock had said before she died. At Sheffield Crown Court, Taylor denied murder, insisting she acted in self-defense after being attacked first. But the jury took barely 3 hours to reject her claim. The judge described the stabbing as sustained and ferocious, noting Taylor's history of violence and her attempt to mislead investigators. On the 22nd of January 2021, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. Outside court, Miss Hancock's family described the killing as tragic and senseless, saying no parent should ever have to plan their child's funeral. The community was left stunned not by the speed of the violence, but by how ordinary the setting was. From this case came bitter lessons. Violence between neighbors often grows from silence, not distance. Addiction strips away empathy until life itself feels disposable, and false claims in the aftermath of crime deepen every wound. Hatred needs only a moment of fury to become irreversible. But, as investigators would soon learn, Sheffield had already seen worse. Just a few years before, Alison Moss had turned her own flat into a torture chamber, a place where cruelty wasn't spontaneous, but sustained, deliberate, and unforgettable. Fifth offender, Alison Moss, 48 years old. On the evening of Thursday, the 25th of August, 2016, a heated argument inside a small Sheffield flat turned into one of the most brutal murders the city had ever seen. By the time police forced open the door on Foxwalk Walkley, the floor was slick with blood, and a neighbor lay lifeless beneath a stained duvet, a victim of what a judge would later call torture, not rage. The killer was 46-year-old Alison Moss, a woman already notorious in her community for violent outbursts. Living on benefits, dependent on alcohol and drugs, and with a criminal record that included slashing a teenager with a razor, Moss's life was steeped in chaos. Her partner, 49-year-old David Webster, was equally volatile. Their neighbor, 47-year-old Craig Wilde, had stopped by that night to confront them after they made threats against another resident. What followed was a scene of unimaginable cruelty. Inside the flat, Wilde was surrounded, beaten, and stabbed repeatedly. Over 15 minutes, Moss and Webster attacked him with a Stanley knife, a kitchen knife, and a screwdriver. He suffered 117 separate injuries, cuts, stabs, and punctures, along with bruises and fractures. His killers even carved an H shape into his torso and sprinkled salt into his wounds. Neighbors later told police they heard him begging, "Please, let me go." Moss's reply, captured faintly through the wall, was chilling. "Go on, go on." When police entered the property, they found Wilde's body covered with a blood-soaked duvet. Moss and Webster were sitting nearby, drunk and detached, claiming he had arrived injured. Forensics quickly exposed the lie. His blood was splattered across their clothing, and their fingerprints were on every weapon. The investigation revealed that both Moss and Webster had been drinking heavily and using drugs before the killing. There was no clear motive beyond paranoia and rage. At Sheffield Crown Court, Moss denied involvement, claiming Webster was solely responsible. The jury saw through her defense. The judge described the attack as savage, sustained, and deliberate, a sadistic act driven by cruelty rather than necessity. Both were convicted of murder in February 2017. Moss was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 29 years, one of the longest sentences ever handed down in Sheffield. The victim's family described their grief as unimaginable, saying Craig's death left a void that can never be filled. Officers called the case one of sheer brutality. From this horror came painful lessons. Anger mixed with intoxication births monstrosity. Ignoring violent neighbors can cost lives, and cruelty committed in company magnifies its evil. Humanity disappears when violence becomes entertainment, and silence becomes complicity. And while Moss's savagery shocked the courts, what happened in Barnsley was something even harder to comprehend. Two women, Justine Wainwright and Penelope Brownlie, joined by violence and drink, turned suspicion over a necklace into a night of pure horror. Sixth offender, Justine Wainwright, 40 years old, and Penelope Brownlie, 41 years old. On the night of Friday, the 18th of May 2018, the quiet streets of Barnsley hid a scene of extraordinary brutality. Inside a small ground-floor flat on Britannia Close, two women turned suspicion into torture and a petty grudge into one of the most savage murders South Yorkshire had ever witnessed. 58-year-old Justine Wainwright, also known as Bridget O'Keefe, lived with her partner, 45-year-old Penelope Brownlie. Their relationship was volatile and steeped in violence. Both were heavy drinkers with short tempers and a shared appetite for control. Neighbors often heard shouting from their home, but no one imagined the horror that would unfold there over a missing gold necklace. The victim, 42-year-old Claire Louise Smith, was lured to the couple's flat late that evening. They believed she had either stolen Brownlie's gold chain or knew who had. Witnesses later recalled hearing angry voices, then screams. What followed was described in court as a sustained and sadistic beating. The women struck Miss Smith with fists, boots, and a pickaxe handle, raining blows for minutes on end as she pleaded for them to stop. At one point, they demanded she say where the chain was. Her cries grew weaker, then fell silent. By dawn, Miss Smith was dead. Her body bore 74 external injuries, fractures, bruises, and deep lacerations. The medical examiner said her death was caused by a very severe physical assault. CCTV footage captured Wainwright and Brownlie hours later, struggling to carry a large, heavy object believed to be her body wrapped in fabric. They dumped it just yards away on Union Street before returning home to scrub their flat with white spirit. Blood stains still seeped through the walls and floor. Police were alerted when neighbors reported the smell and the sounds of cleaning chemicals. Inside, detectives found traces of blood in every room. Both women were arrested and denied responsibility, claiming Miss Smith had left alive and must have been attacked elsewhere. The jury took only 2 hours to reject their story. At Sheffield Crown Court, the judge called them two brutish women, equally culpable, saying their actions bordered on the sadistic. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years. The brutality of the case shocked the local community. A detective described it as sickening in its violence and cruelty, a reminder that evil can thrive behind closed doors and among familiar faces. From this tragedy came enduring lessons. Suspicion fueled by pride is as lethal as hatred. Violence escalates when fed by anger and alcohol, and those who dehumanize others lose their own humanity first. Cruelty begins in suspicion, but ends only in destruction. Still, jealousy would once again return to the stage. In Rotherham, young and reckless Leonie Mason showed how obsession can twist into destruction, proving that manipulation and love can sometimes kill in the same breath. Seventh offender, Leonie Mason, 24 years old. On the night of Sunday, The 21st of August 2016, a silver Vauxhall Astra drove quietly through the outskirts of Rotherham. Inside sat 5 people, 2 adults and 3 teenagers, and one of them, 34-year-old Craig Preston, would never return alive. What began as a tangled love affair ended in a calculated act of cruelty that stunned investigators and left a family broken beyond repair. At the heart of the case was 24-year-old Leonie Mason, a woman torn between 2 men. She had spent 6 years with Craig, a man battling addiction but deeply devoted to her. Yet by 2016, she had moved on into a volatile relationship with 42-year-old Shiraz Bashir, a man the judge later called the driving force behind a murderous plan. Bashir saw Craig as a threat, an obstacle to be erased. Together, they plotted to remove him permanently. Messages recovered from their phones revealed chilling intent. Bashir promised Mason, "Just get him out, and I promise he won't be living." Days later, Mason helped lure Craig to his death. On that August evening, she and 2 teenage boys picked him up under false pretenses and drove to a remote lay-by on Town Lane. There, Bashir and another boy were waiting. What followed was a savage assault, a storm of fists, kicks, and blows from blunt objects that left Craig tied up, beaten, and barely alive. Witnesses later described the attack as sustained and merciless. When it was over, they stuffed his body into the car boot, his trousers pulled down in an act of humiliation. A gruesome photograph taken on Bashir's phone showed Craig's lifeless body, twisted and bloodied, a trophy, as the prosecutor called it. The group drove into the hills near the Woodhead tunnels in Derbyshire, where they pushed his body into a ravine before driving away, leaving him to be found by dog walkers the next morning. Police pieced the case together through CCTV footage, phone records, and that damning photo. The evidence left no room for doubt. In June 2017, Sheffield Crown Court found both Mason and Bashir guilty of murder. Mason, who had changed her name to Alina Shiraz, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years. The brutality of the case rippled through the community. Officers described the crime as savage and degrading, while the judge condemned it as a planned, cold, and deliberate act. 3 lessons endure. Jealousy can be as lethal as any weapon. Manipulation turns love into control. And when cruelty is shared, humanity is lost on all sides. Love built on lies doesn't end in heartbreak, it ends in blood. But murder in South Yorkshire wasn't always personal. In Doncaster, Lisa Thorpe's story showed how a single drunken argument could end with a man dead and a lifetime of regret in return. 8th offender, Lisa Thorpe, 44 years old. In the early hours of Saturday, the 29th of October 2017, the quiet streets of Bentley near Doncaster were pierced by the sound of a woman's desperate call to emergency services. Inside a modest home on the avenue, a man lay bleeding heavily from a single stab wound to the leg, a wound that would prove fatal within minutes. The scene told one story, but Lisa Thorpe's account told another, and the truth would take months to unravel. Lisa Thorpe was 32 years old, a mother of 5, and known among her neighbors for her turbulent relationship with 50-year-old John Poole. Their on-off romance, lasting 18 months, was described in court as volatile, a relationship fueled by jealousy and alcohol. On the evening before his death, the couple had spent the day drinking in a pub to celebrate a friend's birthday. They returned home late, heavily intoxicated, and their night descended into chaos. Thorpe claimed Poole accused her of cheating, grabbed her by the hair, and pressed a knife to her throat, threatening to kill her. In her version, she fought back, striking him until he dropped the knife. As he allegedly hit her from behind, she picked up the blade and lashed out, stabbing him in the leg to get him off. The knife pierced deep into his calf, severing a major artery. Poole collapsed, losing blood rapidly on the living room floor. Instead of immediately telling the truth, Thorpe panicked. She pulled the knife out, threw it aside, and called an ambulance but lied, claiming she had found Poole injured outside her home and dragged him in. She repeated that lie in 4 separate police interviews, forcing investigators to waste days pursuing phantom suspects. Only after forensic analysis contradicted her story did she admit to the stabbing. At Sheffield Crown Court, Thorpe pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The judge rejected her claim of self-defense, calling her shifting story implausible and self-serving. He acknowledged the volatile nature of their relationship, but noted that her lies had delayed justice. In July 2018, Thorpe was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, John Pool's daughter, Chelsea, said her father's death had devastated their family. He was only 50, she told the court. He still had his whole life ahead of him. From this tragedy, 3 warnings emerge. Unchecked anger in toxic relationships breeds irreversible harm. Alcohol clouds reason until violence feels justified, and lies, however small, only deepen the wounds of loss. Violence leaves no winners, only silence, regret, and broken lives in its wake. Then, just when the region thought it had seen it all, chaos struck again, this time in the open, on an ordinary morning walk. The case of Emma Borowy was a chilling reminder that danger doesn't always knock. Sometimes, it escapes from the very institutions meant to protect us. 9th offender. Emma Borowy, 32 years old. On the morning of Wednesday, the 9th of August, 2023, a peaceful park in Westfield, Sheffield, became the scene of a horror no one could have predicted. Within minutes, a 74-year-old man out walking his dog was dead, the victim of a random, frenzied stabbing that exposed a devastating failure within the mental health system meant to protect both patients and the public. The attacker was 32-year-old Emma Borowy, an artist and mother of 1 from Bolton. She had lived with schizophrenia and psychosis for more than a decade and was well known to mental health services since 2008. Described as delusional, she often spoke of being tracked by the devil and believed Lucifer sent her messages. In the months before the killing, she had already shown alarming signs of deterioration, once killing 2 goats in a supposed witchcraft ritual and frequently absconding from her secure hospital unit. By early August 2023, Borowy had escaped from the Royal Bolton Hospital 8 times. On the 4th of August, police found her wandering the streets, paranoid and talking about hurting people. Officers flagged her as dangerous and suicidal, but the warning was never passed back to the hospital. 3 days later, she was granted another period of escorted leave. She slipped away again, boarded a train to Sheffield, and vanished. 2 days later, she struck, as 74-year-old Roger Leadbeater, a retired bus driver and council worker, walked his dog through a quiet park near Shortbrook Close. Borowy attacked him without warning. Witnesses later described her movements as frenzied. Mr. Leadbeater suffered 75 sharp force injuries, 57 stab wounds, and 18 incised cuts, including 1 through his right eye. The brutality of the assault left investigators stunned. Police arrested Borowy the next morning after finding her near the crime scene, covered in blood. She told officers she had been guided by Lucifer and claimed she was being tracked by evil. Charged with murder, she was remanded to prison. But before standing trial, she took her own life in December 2023 at HMP New Hall. The inquest into her case revealed a series of devastating oversights. A psychiatrist had approved her leave despite repeated absconding, and communication failures between Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust and police allowed a tragedy to unfold that many now call preventable. Mr. Leadbeater's niece described him as a kind, gentle man who died in the most brutal and needless way. 3 urgent lessons emerge. Untreated psychosis can turn delusion into danger. Communication gaps in care systems cost lives, and early intervention must never be neglected. Neglect in mental health care doesn't just destroy one life, it leaves ripples of grief that never end. And finally, the streets of Sheffield would once more bleed not from revenge or madness, but from desperation. Katrina Dixon's senseless attack over a charity box showed how violence can arise from the smallest spark of greed. Final offender, Katrina Dixon, 36 years old. On the afternoon of Wednesday, the 30th of October 2024, what began as a petty theft inside a small Sheffield shop spiraled into a scene of chaos and blood. A charity donation box, the kind meant to help others, became the spark for a violent outburst that left 2 shop workers injured and a community shaken. The attacker was 40-year-old Katrina Dixon, a woman with no fixed home and a long history of instability. That day, she walked into a store on Firth Park Road and quietly snatched a charity collection container from the counter. When staff noticed, they followed her outside, demanding she return it. What should have been a simple confrontation turned into something much darker. As one of the staff members, a man in his 20s, tried to stop her, Dixon pulled out a craft knife she'd hidden in her clothing. In a blur of panic and aggression, she slashed at him, stabbing him in the leg. When another employee rushed forward to help, she bit him hard on the hand before trying to flee. Witnesses later described the scene as chaotic and terrifying. The first victim collapsed on the pavement as blood pooled beneath him, while bystanders called for help. Police arrived within minutes. They recovered the knife near the entrance of the shop and arrested Dixon at the scene. The injured man was rushed to hospital with a serious wound, though doctors later confirmed it was not life-threatening. Officers described the attack as an appalling act of violence over a crime that began with theft. At Sheffield Crown Court, Dixon admitted to wounding with intent, theft from a shop, and possession of a sharp weapon in a public place. The prosecution highlighted the shocking escalation, a weapon used against workers simply doing their jobs. Her defense offered little explanation beyond desperation. In June 2025, the court sentenced her to 3 years in prison. Following the verdict, South Yorkshire Police emphasised that retail crime is not victimless, urging the public to recognise the growing threat faced by shop workers across the country. Inspector Ryan Griffiths said, "No one should have to face violence at work. These crimes leave real people scarred, both physically and emotionally." The lessons are sobering. Greed and frustration can explode into violence in seconds. Every small act of aggression leaves lasting scars, and behind every minor crime lies human fear and pain. When empathy disappears from ordinary life, even charity can become a reason for bloodshed. South Yorkshire, a region of history, heritage, and heartbreak. Behind its quiet terraces and bustling markets lie stories that chill the nation to its core. From jealousy-fueled murders to random acts of violence, these are not just tales of crime, they're mirrors reflecting what humanity becomes when conscience disappears. But this is only part of the picture. Across Britain, more secrets lie, buried cases untold, motives unexplained, and killers still hiding in plain sight. If you want to uncover the truth behind the UK's most shocking crimes, subscribe now to UK Real Crime and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next episode as soon as it drops. And tell us in the comments, which case, mystery, or criminal story should we investigate next? Your suggestion could lead to our next deep dive into Britain's darkest reality.